You know, one of the initial stories on Star Trek was I was with a jazz band, actually, and this big burly biker buddy of mine was working at Paramount making copies of tapes, and they said they needed somebody who knew about synthesizers. So there was these two sound effects editors, Steve Flick and Richard Anderson, and he gave my number, and they called me up, and they said, hey, can you come down and make some sound effects for us? So I go down, and they say, what do you want? You know, can you make us an audition? So I said, okay, sure, what do you want? And they said, make the sound of the Starship Enterprise going from warp 1 to warp 7. So I went back to my little home studio and had a little Prophet synthesizer, and I dialed up this effect that I thought was the Starship Enterprise. And I turned it back in, and that tape not only got me the gig, but it became the sound of the Starship Enterprise right out of the gate. So knowing nothing, I just hit a home run. Reflecting on the Hunt for Red October, the idea was to make all these underwater sound effects. So we had the submarine, we had torpedoes, we had the silent drive. If you remember, there was a drive that made no sound, but you were supposed to hear it anyhow. But it could be like a whale. So I did a lot of field recordings where we actually went in boats and in swimming pools, and we were taking balloons and putting balloons over our microphones to make them waterproof. And we're literally dropping mics in the water. And it was the frequency response a little different than a hydrophone. But nonetheless, I remember being out in Long Beach and dropping mics in and having tankers cruise by, and then got the sound of dolphins when we were there. And then we did a lot of stuff in the swimming pool where I actually I had a cover on my swimming pool, and we put a speaker on the cover and then played sound into the pool and re-recorded it with the swimming pool as an echo chamber, and actually got pool sounds. So we made this palette of effects. One of the most interesting effects in Red October was actually the sonar. We must have gone through at least 100 versions of sonar. And it was not only myself, but it was John Paul Fasal and Frank Serafini. We were all compiling sonar. And finally, I took everybody's work, put it into one thing. We came with the definitive final sonar, which was a cheat, because it turns out sonar today is at a very much high frequency. It's up in like the 10 kilohertz range. But we wanted to bring it down, make it sound very authentic to the audience. So we came with this one that finally just had the perfect bleep and the perfect echo, and that became the sonar for Red October. Well, you know, there was this movie in the mid-'80s called Runaway Train, and I was on to be the train specialist. So I did a lot of recordings of diesel locomotives, because it was all diesels, but also all the details of the rails, wheels on track, going through switches, all the mechanics and the brakes. And the idea was to make this locomotive alive. So it was combining real effects, all the details, plus animals. Remember, there's this whole technique of putting real creatures as another sound effect under the sound of a locomotive. So the train comes by, and he not only does it go, he goes, when you combine these things, this is the idea of sound design. This is really what makes movies fly. In the beginning, when we were doing this stuff in the 80s, there were no sound libraries of modern recordings. Everything was old optical. It was stuff at Paramount. It was stuff at Fox. So we had to make our own. There wasn't the kind of CD libraries there are now with Hollywood Edge. You were on your own stuff. So one of the things was, for every movie, you'd go out and record original material. And this gave your movie spice, and it gave you something different. So all that now has built up over time into a library, because you don't have the time to run out and go record New Thunder or go to run out and record a new locomotive. So this library is your asset. This is where you start. This is square one. And from the days when we used to record everything original, now we turn to libraries. We pull everything we got out of the library, and then there's something missing, you go out and record it. I have this pet project I call Ra Music, R-A, like the sun god Ra. And it came from a mathematical analysis of the Great Pyramid in Egypt that said there would be frequencies described by its architecture. So I actually went to the pyramid and recorded the resonance of the king's chamber to confirm this, and found that the resonant frequency of the note A in the pyramid comes out to be 424 cycles, separate from 440. So if you shift music with reference, just keep it the same, but just move the whole keyboard down to 424, it turns out it's in tune with the mind and the body and living things. And it's also in tune with whales and dolphins and birds and wolves. So nature has an actual tonality that comes out naturally, and if you retune your instruments to this reference, you're now in tune with all of nature. As I began to play music for people retuned, I found that people had a more emotional response. It was now tuned to the harmonies of the cells and the mind and the heart and all the life force. So, and interesting enough that these frequencies were used in history. So in the 17th century, the first tuning fork was tuned to this. The resonance of the Mayan temples is tuned to this. The resonance of the pyramid is tuned to this. So throughout history, indigenous peoples that use nature as their reference have made music in this stuff. So a lot of shamans, a lot of aborigines, a lot of Tibetan bowls are all in this tuning. So one of my campaigns is to actually get us to retune our instruments back to these natural frequencies.